When brothers go wrong. 10. Sister Strangler. In 2019, Georgia teenager Kevon Watkins was sentenced to life in prison without ever having the possibility of parole. He earned the sentence at the ripe young age of 18 years old. So what did Kevon do to get such a brutal sentence? He was found guilty of strangling his older sister to death in their home on February 2, 2018. Her name was Alexis Brianna Watkins. She was 2 years older than Kevon. Why did he strangle her? The two got into a heated argument over the Wi-Fi password. According to information brought to light after Kevon's arrest, he had been in an argument with his mother over the internet service they had in their home. Apparently, the internet just wasn't good enough for Kevon. It wasn't up to his standards. Because the internet was so slow, Kevon changed the Wi-Fi password so that he could play his video games without having any of his family members, specifically his sister, slowing the connection down. Alexis, the sister, was enraged with Kevon as he was arguing with their mother because she was worried that things were about to get physical. Sadly for her, they did get physical. Kevon got his sister in a chokehold and squeezed her neck for an estimated 15 minutes. By the time the police arrived, the girl had already suffocated to death. Deputies tried to perform CPR, but there was just no saving her. 9. The Anti-VAXXER. A man in Maryland has allegedly killed his pharmacist brother in the name of vaccine conspiracies. The man's brother was a pharmacist, and he confronted him about his radical ideas that the government is poisoning people with COVID vaccines. This is according to documents taken straight from the court proceedings. Jeffrey Burnham then killed his sister-in-law, a random woman he didn't know, and his brother, all because he claimed that they were killing people by injecting them with the vaccines. To stop his brother from hurting more people, Jeffrey thought it was his duty to murder him and his wife. Jeffrey went to Ellicott City, where authorities believe he killed an elderly woman named Rebecca Reynolds and stole her car. He then drove the dead woman's car to his brother's house and walked in through the front door. He opened fire on his brother and his sister-in-law, then stole his brother's Corvette. The authorities found both victims dead inside the house and Jeffrey long gone. The authorities eventually tracked Jeffrey Burnham to West Virginia, where he was trying to get away in his brother's Corvette. He was arrested and extradited back to Maryland and charged with so many counts of first-degree murder that he's never getting out of jail again. And all because he was a nutjob who didn't trust the government and took his insane theories out on his brother. 8. Dead and buried. When police went to serve a wellness check at a home in Lyons near Chicago, they had never imagined that they would stumble upon a bizarre murder case involving a pair of brothers, a dead sister, and a dead mother. When they knocked on the door, the man living inside freely admitted that he had buried his mom and his sister in the backyard several years prior. The police took this pretty seriously and brought in a team to dig up the backyard. They were also suspicious because of the reason behind the wellness check. A neighbor had initially called them after seeing somebody crawling out of a window as if trying to escape. By that night, Lyons police were searching for bodies. They had to bring in archaeologists and evidence technicians to find the corpses in the backyard. As for the brothers inside the house, they were determined to be living in squalor. The house hadn't had water in over a year. It was a hoarder situation in which the house was filled with trash, and one of the brothers was extremely sick. Police only entered the home once they wore full hazmat suits. They had to remove 2 dogs and then send them to the animal hospital to be checked out. According to the brothers, it had been their sister who pushed their mother down the stairs and killed her. And then later on, they say the sister just kind of died on her own. But considering the brothers buried both bodies in the backyard instead of calling the cops, chances are they could be the real murderers. 7. Sleepy Stabber. Benjamin Elliott was 17 years old when he stabbed his twin sister to death in Harris County. Benjamin has already been charged with a murder after deputies found him performing CPR on his sister, who had been stabbed several times in the neck. According to what Benjamin told the police, he woke up sometime around 2:30 in the morning When he awoke, he was standing in his sister's bedroom and there was a knife jammed inside her throat. When he realized he wasn't dreaming, he pulled the knife out, sat down on the bed, and called 911. His defense is that he had been sleepwalking during the murder. He has no recollection of committing the murder. He had no motive to kill his sister, and he called 911 after he realized what he'd done. This is a bizarre case, and we don't know how it will turn out. Benjamin had no history of mental problems or sleeping disorders. Everyone agrees that the siblings always got along just fine, and there's really no logical reason why he would stroll into his sister's room as she slept and stab her to death. Do you think Benjamin knowingly murdered his sister? Or was this a freak case of sleepwalking gone wrong? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. 6. A troubled teen. McCann Utu Jr. is almost definitely responsible for killing his mother, Stacy Fawcett, and his younger brother, Josiah Utu, just 17. At the time of the murders, McCann was a perfectly ordinary 19-year-old Texan. His mother was a well-known food blogger. The police discovered the body of Stacy, Josiah, and McCann in their Plano home. McCann had actually called the police himself after going on a rampage with a kitchen knife, slashing his mother and brother. Incidentally, he messed up his murders and inflicted some stab wounds on himself as well. He killed his family and then incidentally did himself in. Even after the police had paramedics take the murderer to the Texas Health Presbyterian Hospital, there was nothing doctors could do for him. McCann had stabbed himself so efficiently during his wild attack that he too died. But what was the motive here? According to family members, McCann had not been the same ever since a series of concussions that he suffered while playing sports. The first happened in 2013 while he was playing basketball in high school. A few months later, he had another concussion after getting into a fight with a fellow student. After that, his behavior changed completely. He began to isolate himself, to act erratically, and to just generally be a different person. The head injuries left him troubled, and eventually his rattled brain caused him to go postal and stab his family to death. 5. Embarrassed and crazy. Eduardo Arevalo definitely killed his sister. There's just no way that he didn't. Eduardo confessed. He was arrested and charged with capital murder, and he has since been locked up behind bars. This case was opened and closed in the blink of an eye, with Eduardo being 100% guilty. Now let's look at what happened. Eduardo confessed to the police that he murdered his pregnant sister because she embarrassed him. At the time of the killing, his sister Viridiana was 8 months pregnant. According to Sergeant Aaron Woodard with the Colony Police Department in Texas, Eduardo admitted that the pregnant girl was an embarrassment to her family and that they would be better off if she were dead. So he took matters into his own hands. He killed his sister with his bare hands, then dumped her bloody corpse into an alley less than a mile from the family house. It didn't take long for police to crack the case wide open. Once they interviewed Eduardo, he spilled the beans pretty much immediately. His family members still refuse to believe that he could have done such a thing. They say he's a kind and positive boy, but in reality, he was totally crazy and killed his sister. 4. Dad's gun. A 13-year-old boy in South Carolina has gotten into a bit of trouble for shooting his brother to death. His brother was only 10 years old when he got gunned down over a silly argument about who got to sit in bed and watch TV. Where did the 13-year-old boy get a gun to shoot his brother? The answer is from his father, Gary Roberts. Gary has since been charged with unlawful neglect for leaving a loaded rifle against the wall of an open bedroom. According to Kershaw County Sheriff's Captain David Thomley, the rifle was left in full view of the children while Gary was out running errands. It wasn't in a closet, there was no lock on it, it was just sitting there loaded and ready to fire. This may come as a shock to you, but the shooting went down in a mobile home. The mobile home was in a small neighborhood with other mobile homes, what you might call a trailer park. The older brother, whose name was never released because of his age, used the .22 caliber rifle to shoot his younger brother directly in the face. At the time, their younger sister was also in the home, but she wasn't harmed. And even though the boy is 13, investigators are looking to prosecute him as an adult, meaning he'll probably be in jail well into his 20s. 3. $300. In Prosser, Washington, a man has been arrested for killing a father of 4. The man he killed also happened to be his older brother. According to the authorities, the murder happened during an argument over $300 of debt. The murderer in this case is Alejandro Martinez, who stabbed Oscar Martinez multiple times in the chest and upper back before dropping him off at the nearest hospital. By the time he got his brother to the hospital, he was already dead. When the detective asked what happened, Alejandro claimed that unidentified assailants attacked his brother and then ran away. But when the police questioned him a second time, he changed his story. He couldn't keep the facts straight, and that was when he eventually broke down and said that he was the killer. The saddest part is that the brothers had been fighting over such a small amount of money. Oscar was asking Alejandro to pay the $300 back, but Alejandro refused. Even after the two men went home that day, they kept on arguing through text messages. At one point, Alejandro even texted Oscar and said that if he came anywhere near his home, he would kill him. And sadly, that's exactly what he did when Oscar showed up. Even if Alejandro feels bad about it now, he still picked up the knife and plunged it into his brother's chest. Over 300 measly bucks. 2. Games gone wrong. In Florida, a 2-year-old girl was left in exceptionally critical condition after she was shot by her brother. You might be thinking that her brother is a grown man, but that's not the case. Her brother is only 3 years old. He didn't even shoot her on purpose. He simply found a handgun that had sunk into some couch cushions at their house. The child pulled the handgun from the cushions, pointed it at his sister, and pulled the trigger. This terrifying incident took place in West Lakeland, where a couple of men had met up to watch an NBA game. The only proper thing that happened here is that the men stopped watching basketball long enough to take the dying child to the hospital, although it took a bit of time to get her there. As they were driving the interstate, they T-boned another vehicle and sustained serious injuries. It was a good Samaritan who stopped and took the dying child from the men and rushed her to the hospital themselves. The girl had one surgery right away with a second soon to follow. Amazingly, she might still live. The bullet passed through her chest, down through her pancreas, piercing the large and small intestines before bursting out of her back. In the end, hopefully the girl survives. The men who were present in the house are now facing serious charges involving illegal firearms. Plus, deputies at the scene of the car accident found illegal drugs. Chances are, even if the girl survives, the men in her life will all be in prison. 1. Accidentally run over. In Brunswick County, Virginia, a man accidentally killed his brother. It happened when the guy was trying to give his brother a ride one morning. 61-year-old Carlton Stith was driving down the road at approximately 5:51 a.m. On the shoulder, walking in the dusk, Carlton saw his brother. Naturally, he tried to flag his brother down and give him a ride. Carlton pulled his 2019 Chevy pickup truck onto the shoulder just beyond where he saw his brother. Then he slammed the truck into reverse, thinking he could back up a few feet to where his brother was walking. Sadly, Carlton backed up too quickly and went too far, running over his brother Jerry and killing him. It was definitely an accident. Carlton quickly called the police and told them what happened. Paramedics arrived, but Jerry Van Stith was pronounced dead at the scene. Carlton wasn't actually charged with murder, seeing as it was an accident, but he did get charged with the bizarre crime of improper backing. You see, there are laws in Virginia that require a person backing up a vehicle to make sure they can do so safely. In this case, Carlton did not back up safely. Not safely at all.
Number 10. The Hollywood Ripper. Michael Gargiulo is the Hollywood Ripper. Judge Larry P. Fidler from Los Angeles, California, called his crimes vicious and frightening when giving out the sentence for his terrible crime spree. The judge sentenced Gargiulo to death. He also said that everywhere Michael went, the death and destruction followed. Michael had a lot of jobs in his life. He was a bouncer for a while. He did some time as an air conditioning repairman, and he was an aspiring actor. But he also worked as a killer. He murdered Tracy Pacasio in 1993, Ashlyn Ellerin in 2001, Maria Bruno in 2005, and he tried to murder a woman in Santa Monica in 2008. Back in 2001, Ashley Ellerin was actually pen pals with the famous actor Ashton Kutcher. She was due to go on a date with the actor when she was discovered in her Hollywood home with 47 stab wounds. Kutcher had gone to her house in the hills and knocked at her door, but she never answered. He simply thought he'd been stood up, but in fact, she was lying dead inside at the hands of Michael Gargiulo. Why did Michael go on a random kill spree from 1993 to 2008? There's not really a good answer to this question. He targeted young and attractive women, and he brutalized them for no other reason than he wanted to. Number 9. The Golden State Killer. The Golden State Killer went on a crime spree that lasted a decade. The spree was something out of a nightmare, who then used his knowledge of police work in the judicial system to get away with 13 murders and dozens of assaults through the 1970s and 1980s. His real name is Joseph James DeAngelo Jr., 74 years old, when he was finally sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But some might say it was too little too late. He wasn't arrested until 2018, 3 decades after he stopped murdering. The guy had 3 adult daughters at the time, and a whole stable of grandchildren. He was considered the harmless grandfather, and yet he had a darker past than anyone in his family could have imagined. Like many killers from the 70s and 80s who were recently caught, James was tracked down and arrested because of DNA matches. We know that he began killing in 1975 in the Sacramento area. After his first few kills, he spread into the rest of the state and struck wherever he saw fit. But his spree ended as quickly as it started in 1986 when he murdered an 18-year-old girl. As quickly as the hunger had taken him over, it left him. He stopped killing and settled down. He was still a monster. Number 8. 4 decades of murder. Samuel Little spent 4 decades murdering. When he was finally apprehended, he confessed to committing 93 homicides. Through his confession, police were able to confirm at least 50 of them. That makes him the most prolific serial killer in the United States of America. And yet, nobody knows the guy's name. If you were to say Samuel Little, most people wouldn't bat an eye. Yet they know the names of dozens of other serial killers who are notorious, with way fewer murderers under their belts. Samuel began killing in 1971. He met a woman at a bar in North Miami, and something just came over him. After he murdered the woman, he realized he liked it. He then began targeting prostitutes and runaway teenagers, or women who had difficulties with drugs or alcohol. Most of these women were already missing people when they encountered Samuel Little, exiled from society. They weren't entirely missed. When a woman disappeared from a street corner in the 1970s, it didn't make national news. This wasn't like Ted Bundy, who went after young college students and professionals. This was ultimately what made Ted Bundy far more notorious and what got him caught in the end. It wasn't until recently that DNA evidence finally connected Samuel to several unexplained deaths. One of the killings had even been pinned on a carnival worker named Jerry Frank Townsend in 1979. He spent 22 years in prison before DNA evidence shifted the blame onto Samuel. Number 7. Green River Killer. Gary Ridgway, aka the Green River Killer, is without a doubt the most famous man that we've talked about today. He himself claimed to have murdered at least 80 women, maybe even more. He killed them in the Seattle, Washington area. When he was finally convicted in 2003, he pleaded guilty to 48 counts of murder. He even spread out over a 20-year span. This is a lot of murder. Gary needed to kill around 3 people a year, and to do it all without ever getting caught. He was methodical in his killing, strangling woman after woman and dumping their corpses in a random place to confuse the authorities. He never kept any trophies. He never told anyone what he was doing. and he never showed any signs of being a psychopath at the truck plant where he worked. He was also married 3 times, and none of his wives knew what he was up to in his spare time. The killings began in 1982 when a group of kids found the strangled corpse of Wendy Caulfield floating in the Green River. Over the next few weeks, 4 more bodies washed up on the river's banks. All of them were women, and all of them had been strangled. And here's what's really infuriating. Gary Ridgway was a suspect in 1983 following the death of Marie Malvar. Police questioned Gary at his home, but he denied ever knowing her. There was nothing until 2003 when he was finally arrested. When the cops got him, he admitted that during the original questioning in '83, he leaned against a fence to hide the scratches on his arm. Those scratches were left behind by Marie as she tried to escape. Number 6. Luxury vehicle theft spree. In Canada's biggest city, a luxury vehicle theft ring was just uncovered after 10 years of operation. According to the Toronto Police, working with officers in York, Niagara, Peel, and Halton, the crime spree saw dozens of the most expensive luxury vehicles be pulled out of people's driveways and sold for profit. The police finally cracked down on the thieves in Project Yellowbird. They conducted 30 raids across the Toronto area early on a Thursday morning, arresting 8 people in connection to approximately 150 theft charges. But as more and more stolen property is being discovered, the charges are going up and up. The thieves were targeting houses in rich neighborhoods with expensive vehicles. The people involved knew exactly what they were doing. The police raided 8 residences, 1 business, several storage lockers, and even a cargo container. The container had 2 stolen cars in it when they searched it. And considering these guys had been operating for decades already, the Canadian police probably don't have a clue how many actual thefts took place. They recovered 23 vehicles so far in connection to the thieves, but those were just the vehicles they hadn't sold yet. If they had 23 luxury cars ready to go when they were arrested, just imagine how many they shipped out over the last decade. Number 5. Harold Shipman. Harold Shipman was the worst serial killer in the history of the United Kingdom. He attended the Leeds School of Medicine and started working as a physician in the year 1970. Over the next 28 years, he killed no less than 215 of his patients. However, the real number could be as high as 260. He killed them with a lethal injection of painkillers. Harold was inspired to go to medical school after he watched his mother slowly die from terminal lung cancer. She passed away in 1963, and 7 years later he graduated. By 1974, he was married to a woman named Primrose and had 2 children with her. He also had his very own medical practice and was thriving as a family practitioner. But he was caught in 1975 forging prescriptions for painkillers to feed his own addiction. He entered a drug rehab program and a few years later was working as a doctor at Donnybrook Medical Center. He worked at the hospital for nearly 2 decades, but at some point, the local undertaker noticed that many of his patients were dying. He also noticed they were all dying nearly the same way. The undertaker approached Harold, and so too did one of his medical colleagues who stumbled upon the same thing. The police got involved, but Harold was ultimately cleared of any wrongdoing. It wasn't until much later when he was under suspicion again that it came out he was altering the medication records of his patients. When he was finally apprehended, there was no way for investigators to know exactly how many people he killed. He's been doing it ever since he was a doctor. Harold never cooperated with authorities. He denied every accusation, and they could only charge him with a total of 15 murders. Up until his death in 2004, he never said a word about why he killed all those people. Why do you think Harold did it? Let us know your theories in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe before the end of the video. Number 4. Legrella. For decades, the crime squad in Paris was haunted by the atrocities committed by a notorious, unidentified serial killer. Starting in 1986, Paris became the playground for an unknown psychopath. He started killing and didn't stop until the 1990s. But it wasn't until 35 years later that the Paris police finally identified their man. His name is François Verove, but the French call him Legrella. It translates to the pockmarked man. One of his first victims was arguably his most shocking crime. Cécile Bach was reported missing after she failed to show up to school in 1986. The girl was only 11 years old. What her parents didn't know at the time was that the pockmarked man had gotten a hold of her on her way to class and then brutally ripped her to shreds like a mad werewolf. But this was only one of his murders. He has now, thanks to DNA evidence, been linked to at least 4 in total. Yet according to Didier Saban, the lawyer representing the families of the victims, he is probably responsible for a lot more. His DNA only connects him to murders up until 1994. Theoretically, he could have kept on killing, but they finally caught up to him in 2021. He could have gotten a lot better at hiding his DNA. But because he's dead now, we'll never know the true tale of his crimes. Number 3. Todd KOHLHEPP. Todd KOHLHEPP was born in Florida in 1971. His parents divorced when he was only 2. His mother married a new man, and Todd had a rather unhealthy relationship with the new husband. Todd became a troublesome child. He was aggressive to other children as early as nursery school. By the age of 9, he was so explosively violent that he had to undergo counseling. Before he was even 10, he became obsessed with sexual content. He was cruel to animals, caught murdering a goldfish and shooting at dogs with a BB gun. In other words, he was a troubled psychopath from the very beginning. His mother and stepfather separated in 1983, and Todd went to live with his biological father in Arizona. He started collecting weapons, he learned how to make bombs, and he continued signs of being a generally unstable and violent person. On November 25, 1986, when Todd was only 15 years old, he kidnapped a 14-year-old girl. He took her back to his house, tied her up, and assaulted her. He then walked her home as if he were a gentleman, though he did threaten to kill her family if she told anybody what he did. She told on him anyway, and he was charged with kidnapping. In 1987, Todd was sentenced to 15 years in prison. He was found to have borderline personality disorder and an IQ of way above average. A judge deemed him unlikely to be rehabilitated. He was let out in August of 2001 after serving 14 years. He graduated from the University of South Carolina with a Bachelor's of Science degree in 2008. On the outside, he looked quite successful. He had a real estate license. He built an entire real estate firm and had his own employees, and he even managed to get a private pilot license. He was also quite wealthy. Unbeknownst to those around him, he started killing almost immediately when he was let out of jail. In 2003, he walked into a motorcycle shop and shot 4 people for no reason. In 2016, Todd attacked 2 people who were sent to clear his house. The police found Charles Carver dead on Todd's property, then Kala Brown chained up to a wall in a metal storage container. Todd was arrested immediately. An additional search of his property revealed 2 more bodies identified as a husband and wife who had gone missing in 2015. Between 2003 and 2016, he killed a confirmed 8 people. How many more is still unknown. Number 2. Lonnie David Franklin Jr. Lonnie David Franklin Jr. preyed on the women of Los Angeles for more than 2 decades. On a warm Saturday evening in 2020, he was discovered unresponsive in his cell. He was pronounced dead just before 8 p.m. But if anything, his death came just a little earlier than expected. He was already sitting on death row for murdering a total of 10 people from between 1985 to 2007. Lonnie Franklin was one of the most prolific killers in California. Like many other serial killers, he targeted young and vulnerable victims. He was actually quite similar to Samuel Little. He targeted the poor and the destitute, which allowed him to fly under the radar as he went on killing. Plus, this was due to the crack epidemic of the 80s, when it seemed everywhere you looked in California, people were dying from drug overdoses. During his trial, prosecutors were able to connect him to all 10 slayings, but detectives say he probably killed upwards of 15 more women. And number 1, Robert Hansen. Robert Hansen spent the 1970s hunting women in the Alaska wilderness as if they were wild deer. He's known these days as the Butcher Baker. He was convicted in 1984 after confessing to murdering 17 women. During a crime spree that went on for 12 years, he picked off dancers and prostitutes while assaulting at least an additional 30 women, but not killing them. He was convicted for 4 of the murders, then handed a sentence of 461 years in prison. Sadly, Robert didn't spend almost 5 centuries suffering in jail. He died in 2014 at the age of 75 of seemingly natural causes. There's a movie about Robert Hansen called The Frozen Ground. It stars John Cusack, Nicolas Cage, and Vanessa Hudgens. Have you seen it?
10. Over the edge. Andrea Celea's life ended in the Dominican Republic when she flipped over the side of a balcony and fell 8 floors to the ground below. She didn't trip and fall. It wasn't a drunk accident. She was pushed. She had moved to the capital of Santo Domingo with her family shortly before her death. It was when she moved that she met the man who would ultimately be her undoing. His name is Gabriel Villanueva, and he's the one that shoved Andrea off the balcony to her death. He's since been given 20 years for murder. To understand why it unfolded this way, we need to go back to the beginning. 1 year before she was discovered dead on the pavement outside of a hotel in the capital, Andrea had broken things off with Gabriel. They had not been on good terms for a full 12 months. And then out of the blue, the pair got together to spend 3 days at the hotel to celebrate Andrea's birthday. It didn't make much sense, especially considering she had taken out a restraining order against him just days before they checked into the hotel together. She had been concerned for her safety because he was displaying violent and aggressive behavior. Nonetheless, the pair checked into the hotel together. Less than 4 hours later, Gabriel beat her up and threw her off the balcony. 9. Hotel Pesticides. Kayleen Null and Tom Schwander stayed at the Gran Bahia Principe Hotel La Romana in June. Everything was going great until 6 days into their vacation, when their rooms started to stink like chemicals. Both of them woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning covered in sweat, with pounding headaches, dizzy, and hardly able to breathe. They were seriously ill, and so they purchased tickets to go home before the sun had even come up. Even though they had blood coming out of their butts and what felt like chainsaws in their guts, they endured the flight home. They absolutely did not want to be sick in the Dominican Republic. When they got home, they went immediately to their doctor. Their doctor informed them that they had been poisoned by a pesticide and exposed to insecticides. These chemicals made them ill beyond belief. And according to the couple, they believed the chemicals were being sprayed into their hotel room through the air conditioning system. They witnessed a maintenance person spraying palm plants just outside the room. They figure whatever the maintenance worker was spraying the palm plants with got into the air conditioning system and poisoned them. In total, the couple was sick for 6 weeks. It wouldn't be so suspicious if this was an isolated incident, but it wasn't. Edward Holmes and Cynthia Day were found dead in their room at the Gran Bahia Principe resort shortly after. The cause of death for both was ruled as sudden respiratory failure. Yvette Monique Short also passed away at the resort after having just 1 drink from the minibar. She was also believed to have suffered respiratory failure. Maybe it's pesticides or maybe not, but something is definitely killing the guests at this hotel while they sleep. 8. One dead shark. A group of visitors recently dragged a shark out of the water to take pictures with it, which is honestly such a cruel thing to do. And because it was out of the water for so long, it caused the shark to suffocate and die. It happened at the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Punta Cana. The tourist and some staff worked together to capture the shark in the shallow water and haul it back onto the shore. It was pretty big, taking 7 men to hold the thing down, at least until it stopped moving. What happened here is something uniquely human. The shark was pinned down, a life preserver was shoved into its mouth, and it lay helpless as flocks of tourists came up and took photos with it. By the time the humans got bored, the shark was already dead. The poor thing suffocated outside the water for one of the cringiest photo shoots in beach history. 7. Violence in the streets. The streets of the Dominican Republic are just as dangerous as the hotels, especially in the city of Higüey. It was here that a man named Anielo Santana shot his wife, stole a woman's car at gunpoint, then went on an insane shooting spree. He killed 7 people, wounded 8, and was ultimately shot dead by the cops. According to the local police in the Dominican Republic, it all happened because of an argument. Anielo had gone into the home of Angela Acosta, his estranged wife. Whatever they got into an argument about was so severe that Anielo snapped and went completely crazy. He shot his wife, then decided to play some real-world Grand Theft Auto. Once he carjacked the woman on the street and started driving, he wanted to see how many people he could shoot dead before the cops finally got him. First, he barged into a cell phone store and shot a 21-year-old woman and her teenage brother. They had been shopping for a Father's Day present. Anielo then went on blasting random people until the cops finally cornered him. There was a brief firefight and Anielo was taken away in a body bag. 6. One dead expat. Lindsay de Feliz, a British author living in the Dominican Republic, was discovered dead. Her decayed corpse was uncovered in a shallow grave in 2019. She'd been murdered by strangulation and left in the forest. All these years later, we still don't know who did it. It's taken until 2022 to get her husband of 14 years, his 2 sons, and a 4th man brought to trial for her death. Prosecutors say these men worked together to murder the 64-year-old woman. However, they've all pleaded not guilty, and we're still waiting for their day in court. Lindsay's story starts in 2002. She had lived a very successful life in the UK as a marketing manager, but she wanted something different. In 2002, she abandoned her husband, quit her job, and moved to the Maldives to scuba dive. She ended up settling in the Dominican Republic, getting a job as a scuba instructor, and marrying a local in 2005. She supported this man financially and even tried to get him elected as mayor. When Lindsay was shot in 2006 through the throat during a robbery gone bad, things took a dark turn. She couldn't scuba dive anymore and started writing instead. She wrote a book that reached #1 on the book charts, and now she's dead. Her husband has been accused of the murder, conspiring with his family to get rid of Lindsay and keep her money for themselves. Would you ever consider relocating to the Dominican Republic permanently after hearing about the sad case of Lindsay de Feliz? Let us know in the comments why or why not, and don't forget to hit subscribe before the end of the video. 5. Crash landing. In 2021, 9 people tragically died in a terrifying plane crash in the Dominican Republic. The private plane had to make an emergency landing when something went wrong, but the landing went wrong too. 7 passengers and 2 of the crew were brutally killed when the plane crashed down at Las Americas Airport in Santo Domingo. That was everyone on board. Among the dead was the famous Puerto Rican music producer Jose A. Hernandez, also known as Flo La Movie. It's not clear what went wrong. The plane had taken off from La Isabela International Airport and was on its way to Florida when it ran into issues just 15 minutes after taking off. 4. Left for dead. A woman from Delaware had the worst vacation of her life when she was brutally attacked in the Dominican Republic. Not only was Tammy Lawrence Daly attacked violently, but she was severely injured mentally. She'll never forget the night she was beaten, violated, and locked in an underground dungeon. As Tammy was going to grab a snack, a man rammed her from behind, knocked her to the ground, and dragged her into an underground room. Once he had her inside the waist area, beneath where hundreds of vacationers were falling asleep or partying into the night, he tortured her. He kicked her, he beat her with a club, and he did other, even more heinous stuff as well. He choked her, strangled her, and left her to die. From here, things were pretty bleak for Tammy. She was injured beyond the ability to move. The bones in her face had been crushed. She slipped in and out of consciousness and was only found 8 hours later by her family and friends. Her family had needed to convince the hotel staff she was missing for them to actually start looking across their property. Tammy spent 5 days in the hospital, had to go through several surgeries, and her attacker was never found. 3. Human smuggling ring. The Dominican Republic may be famous for its beautiful beaches and hot weather, but it's also famous for its human smuggling. Authorities recently dismantled a massive criminal network involved in smuggling human beings at $20,000 per person. These human smugglers were involved in trying to bring 3 Dominican nationals into the U.S. The 3 Dominicans were among 56 other migrants killed when a truck bound for the U.S. crashed in Mexico. Security forces launched raids in the cities of Bani and Santo Domingo, arresting nearly a dozen people. These individuals were charged in the illicit trafficking of human beings, according to the Attorney General's office. But amazingly, prosecutors only requested jail sentences of 18 months each. This means that in less than 2 years, they'll probably be right back smuggling again. They used the money they made bringing people from the Dominican to the U.S. to buy luxury vehicles and real estate. Here's how they got the people from one point to the other. They would put the migrants on flights from the Dominican Republic to somewhere like Guatemala, Panama, or Mexico. They were then put inside freight containers and hauled across the land border into the U.S. Once inside, they were freed from the containers to go about their business. As for that truck accident I talked about earlier, it was really what forced the security forces in the Dominican Republic to crack down on the smugglers. The speeding tractor-trailer hauling a container full of migrants hit a pedestrian bridge on a highway and flipped over. Migrants were shot across the pavement, while some became trapped in the twisted metal. A total of 107 migrants, all of who were trying to sneak into the U.S. across the border, were injured. Among those seeking refuge in the United States were nationals of Guatemala, Colombia, and the Dominican. 2. A mysterious collapse. Galina Isayeva was 53 years old and healthy as a horse. She didn't have a thing wrong with her. She was as spry as a teenager, and yet she dropped dead in late April while vacationing in the Dominican Republic. Her husband told investigators he doesn't believe for a second that she simply collapsed, and yet that's what the Dominican authorities are saying. They say Galina collapsed from a pulmonary edema, which is a buildup of fluid in the lungs. She had been enjoying her vacation, everything was totally normal, and then she collapsed, stopped breathing, and was dead. Nobody knows what happened to Galina. Some have blamed dangerous pesticides in the air conditioning. Some say she could have been exposed to tainted alcohol. There definitely wasn't any evidence of violence, at least not physically. So far as the authorities can tell, she died from natural causes. But her family doesn't think so. They believe her death to be a mystery likely being covered up by the hotel she was staying at and the Dominican authorities. Her family believes the cover-up is a desperate attempt to protect the country's reputation as a tourism destination. 1. Surgical complications. A mother of 2 from New York City wanted to look even better than she already did. She was working as a nurse and a makeup artist in the city when she decided to get some plastic surgery done. She couldn't afford to do it in the U.S., so she booked the procedure in the Dominican Republic. But after she traveled to the Caribbean island to get liposuction on her buttocks, she ended up in a coffin. Her name was Jesmi Tapia, just 30 years old. She had to be hospitalized at a local medical facility in the Dominican Republic because of an infection after the operation. They put her under observation in the intensive care unit, but she quickly passed away. We don't actually know all the complicated details surrounding the case. Her family has kept extremely quiet and denied the accusations that she had also been in the Dominican to undergo breast augmentation surgery. The family also haven't given any information on which facility Jesme paid to have the procedure done. If you or someone you know has been thinking of getting surgery done in the Dominican Republic, this should be a really strong wake-up call. Researchers at the University of Texas Medical Branch released a report in 2019. The report showed irrefutable evidence that the Dominican Republic is one of the most dangerous places to have plastic surgery done. The study found that doctors are not properly qualified, clinics don't adhere to safety guidelines, and dozens of people end up dying from complications. How do you feel about taking a vacation to the Dominican Republic after hearing these horror stories? Let us know in the comments, and thanks so much for watching. If you haven't yet, be sure to hit subscribe, support the channel, and I'll see you again for another awesome video. Bye!